Welcome to a Fireside Reading of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, Chapter 32, Part 2. In the morning I was joined by Mr. Peggotty and by my old nurse, and we went at an early hour to the coach office where Mrs. Gummidge and Ham were waiting to take leave of us. "Mas'r Davy," Ham whispered, drawing me aside while Mr. Peggotty was stowing his bag among the luggage. "His life is quite broke up. He doesn't know where he's going. He don't know what's afore him. He's bound upon a voyage that'll last on and off all the rest of his days, take my word for it, unless he finds what he's a-seeking of. I am sure you'll be a friend to him, Master Davy." "Trust me, I will indeed," said I, shaking hands with Ham earnestly. Thank ye very kind, sir. One thing further. I'm in good employ, you know, Master Davy, and I ain't no way now of spending what I gets. Money's of no use to me no more, except to live. If you can lay it out for him, I shall do my work with a better art. Though, as to that, sir," and he spoke very steadily and mildly, "you're not to think but I shall work at all times like a man, and act the best that lays in my power." I told him I was well convinced of it, and I hinted that I hoped the time might even come when he would cease to lead the lonely life he naturally contemplated now. "No, sir," he said, shaking his head. "All that's past and over with me, sir. No one can never fill the place that's empty. But you'll bear in mind about the money, as there's at all times some laying by for him." Reminding him of the fact that Mr. Peggotty derived a steady, though certainly a very moderate income from the bequest of his late brother-in-law, I promised to do so. We then took leave of each other. I cannot leave him even now without remembering with a pang at once his modest fortitude and his great sorrow. As to Mrs. Gummidge, if I were to endeavor to describe how she ran down the street by the side of the coach, seeing nothing but Mr. Peggotty up on the roof, through the tears she tried to repress, and dashing herself against the people who were coming in the opposite direction, I should enter on a task of some difficulty. Therefore I had better leave her sitting on a baker's doorstep, out of breath, with no shape at all remaining in her bonnet, and one of her shoes lying on the pavement at a considerable distance. When we got to our journey's end, our first pursuit was to look about for a little lodging for Peggotty where her brother could have a bed. We were so fortunate as to find one of a very clean and cheap description over a chandler's shop only 2 streets removed from me. When we had engaged this domicile, I bought some cold meat at an eating-house and took my fellow travellers home to tea, a proceeding, I regret to state, which did not meet with Mrs. Crupp's approval, but quite the contrary. I ought to observe, however, in explanation of that lady's state of mind, that she was much offended by Peggotty's tucking up her widow's gown before she'd been 10 minutes in the place and setting to work to dust my bedroom. This Mrs. Crupp regarded in the light of a liberty, and a liberty, she said, was a thing she never allowed. Mr. Peggotty had made a communication to me on the way to London for which I was not unprepared. It was that he purported first seeing Mrs. Steerforth. As I felt bound to assist him in this, and also to mediate between them, with the view of sparing the mother's feelings as much as possible, I wrote to her that night. I told her as mildly as I could what his wrong was and what my own share in his injury. I said he was a man in very common life, but of a most gentle and upright character, and that I ventured to express a hope that she would not refuse to see him in his heavy trouble. I mentioned 2:00 in the afternoon as the hour of our coming, and I sent the letter myself by the first coach in the morning. At the appointed time, we stood at the door of that house, where I had been a few days since so happy, where my youthful confidence and warmth of heart had been yielded up so freely, which was closed against me henceforth, which was now a waste, a ruin. No Littimer appeared. The pleasanter face which had replaced him on the occasion of my last visit answered to our summons and went before us to the drawing-room. Mrs. Steerforth was sitting there. Rosa Dartle glided as we went in from another part of the room and stood behind her chair. I saw directly in his mother's face that she knew from himself what he had done. It was very pale and bore the traces of deeper emotion than my letter alone, weakened by the doubts her fondness would have raised upon it, would have been likely to create. I thought her more like him than ever I had thought her, and I felt rather than saw that the resemblance was not lost on my companion. She sat upright in her armchair with a stately, immovable, passionless air that it seemed as if nothing could disturb. She looked very steadfastly at Mr. Peggotty when he stood before her, and he looked quite as steadfastly at her. Rosa Dartle's keen glance comprehended all of us. For some moments not a word was spoken. She motioned to Mr. Peggotty to be seated. He said in a low voice, "I shouldn't feel it natural, ma'am, to sit down in this house. I'd sooner stand." And this was succeeded by another silence, which she broke thus. "I know, with deep regret, what has brought you here. What do you want of me? What do you ask me to do?" He put his hat under his arm, and feeling in his breast for Emily's letter, took it out, unfolded it, and gave it to her. "Please to read that, ma'am. That's my niece's hand." She read it in the same stately and impassive way, untouched by its contents as far as I could see, and returned it to him. "Unless he brings me back a lady," said Mr. Peggotty, tracing out that part with his finger. "I come to know, ma'am, whether he will keep his word." "No," she returned. "Why not?" said Mr. Peggotty. "It is impossible. He would disgrace himself. You cannot fail to know that she is far below him." "Raise her up," said Mr. Peggotty. "She is uneducated and ignorant." "Maybe she's not." "Maybe she is," said Mr. Peggotty. "I think not, ma'am. But I'm no judge of them things. Teach her better." "Since you oblige me to speak more plainly, which I am very unwilling to do, her humble connections would render such a thing impossible if nothing else did." "Hark," to this, ma'am," he returned slowly and quietly. "You know what it is to love your child. So do I. If she was 100 times my child, I couldn't love her more. You don't know what it is to lose your child. I do. All the heaps of riches in the world would be nought to me if they was mine to buy her back. But save her from this disgrace, and she shall never be disgraced by us. Not one of us that she's growed up among, not one of us that's lived along with her and had her for all their all in all these many years will ever look upon her pretty face again. We'll be content to let her be. We'll be content to think of her far off, as if she was underneath another sun and sky. We'll be content to trust her to her husband, to her little children, perhaps, and bide the time when all of us shall be alike in quality afore our God." The rugged eloquence with which he spoke was not devoid of all effect. She still preserved her proud manner, but there was a touch of softness in her voice as she answered, "I justify nothing. I make no counter-accusations. But I am sorry to repeat, it is impossible. Such a marriage would irretrievably blight my son's career and ruin his prospects. Nothing is more certain than that it never can take place and never will. If there is any other compensation—" "I am looking at the likeness of the face," interrupted Mr. Peggotty with a steady but a kindling eye, "that has looked at me in my home, at my fireside, in my boat. We're not smiling and friendly when it was so treacherous that I go half wild when I think of it. If the likeness of that face don't turn to burning fire at the thought of offering money to me for my child's blight and ruin, it's as bad. I don't know being a lady's, but what it's worse." She changed now, in a moment. An angry flush overspread her features, and she said, in an intolerant manner, grasping the armchair tightly with her hands, "What compensation can you make to me for opening such a pit between me and my son? What is your love to mine? What is your separation to ours?" Miss Dartle softly touched her and bent down her head to whisper, but she would not hear a word. "No, Rosa, not a word. Let the man listen to what I say. My son, who has been the object of my life, to whom its every thought has been devoted, whom I have gratified from a child in every wish, from whom I've had no separate existence since his birth, to take up in a moment with a miserable girl and avoid me, to repay my confidence with systematic deception for her sake, and quit me for her, to set this wretched fancy against his mother's claims upon his duty, love, respect, gratitude, claims that every day and hour of his life should have strengthened into ties that nothing could be proof against, Is this no injury?" Again Rosa Dartle tried to soothe her, again ineffectually. "I say, Rosa, not a word!" If he can stake his all upon the lightest object, I can stake my all upon a greater purpose. Let him go where he will, with the means that my love has secured to him. Does he think to reduce me by long absence? He knows his mother very little if he does. Let him put away his whim now, and he is welcome back. Let him not put her away now, and he shall never come near me, living or dying, while I can raise my hand to make a sign against it, unless, being rid of her forever, he comes humbly to me and begs for my forgiveness. This is my right. This is the acknowledgment I will have. This is the separation that there is between us, and is this," she added, looking at her visitor with the proud, intolerant air with which she had begun, "no injury?" While I heard and saw the mother as she said these words, I seemed to hear and see the son defying them. All that I had ever seen in him of an unyielding, willful spirit I saw in her. All the understanding that I had now of his misdirected energy became an understanding of her character too, and a perception that it was in its strongest springs the same. She now observed to me aloud, resuming her former restraint, that it was useless to hear more or to say more, and that she begged to put an end to the interview. She rose with an air of dignity to leave the room when Mr. Peggotty signified that it was needless. "Don't fear me being any hindrance to you. I have no more to say, ma'am," he remarked as he moved towards the door. "I come here with no hope, and I take away no hope. I have done what I thought should be done, but I never looked for any good to come of my standing where I do. This has been too evil a house for me and mine, for me to be in my right senses and expect it." With this, we departed, leaving her standing by her elbow chair, a picture of a noble presence and a handsome face. We had, on our way out, to cross a paved hall with glass sides and roof over which a vine was trained. Its leaves and shoots were green then, and the day being sunny, a pair of glass doors leading to the garden were thrown open. Rosa Dartle, entering this way with a noiseless step when we were close to them, addressed herself to me. "You do well," she said, "indeed, to bring this fellow here." Such a concentration of rage and scorn as darkened her face and flashed in her jet-black eyes, I could not have thought comprehensible, even into that face. The scar made by the hammer was, as usual in this excited state of her features, strongly marked. When the throbbing I had seen before came into it as I looked at her, she absolutely lifted up her hand and struck it. "This is a fellow," she said, "to champion and bring here, is he not? You are a true man." "Miss Dartle," I returned, "you are surely not so unjust as to condemn me." "Why do you bring division between these two mad creatures?" she returned. "Don't you know that they are both mad with their own self-will and pride?" "It is my doing," I returned. "It is your doing," she retorted. "Why do you bring this man here?" "He is a deeply injured man, Miss Dartle," I replied. "You may not know it." "I know that James Steerforth," she said, with her hand on her bosom, as if to prevent the storm that was raging there from being loud, "has a false, corrupt heart, and is a traitor. But what need I know or care about this fellow and his common niece?" "Miss Dartle," I returned, "you deepen the injury. It is sufficient already. I will only say at parting that you do him a great wrong." "I do him no wrong," she returned. "They are a depraved, worthless set. I would have her whipped." Mr. Peggotty passed on without a word and went out of the door. "Oh, shame, Miss Dartle, shame," I said indignantly. "How can you bear to trample on his undeserved affliction?" "I would trample on them all," she answered. "I would have his house pulled down. I would have her branded on the face, dressed in rags, and cast out in the streets to starve. If I had the power to sit in judgment on her, I would see it done. See it done? I would do it. I detest her. If I ever could reproach her with her infamous condition, I would go anywhere to do so. If I could hunt her to her grave, I would. If there was any word of comfort that would be a solace to her in her dying hour, and only I possessed it, I wouldn't part with it for life itself." The mere vehemence of her words can convey, I am sensible, but a weak impression of the passion by which she was possessed, and which made itself articulate in her whole figure, though her voice, instead of being raised, was lower than usual. No description I could give of her would do justice to my recollection of her, or to her entire deliverance of herself to her anger. I have seen passion in many forms, but I have never seen it in such a form as that. When I joined Mr. Peggotty, he was walking slowly and thoughtfully down the hill. He told me, as soon as I came up with him, that having now discharged his mind of what he had purposed doing in London, he meant to set out on his travels that night. I asked him where he meant to go. He only answered, "I'm a-going, sir, to seek my niece." We went back to the little lodging over the chandler's shop, and there I found an opportunity of repeating to Peggotty what he had said to me. She informed me in return that he had said the same to her that morning. She knew no more than I did where he was going, but she thought he had some project shape out in his mind. I did not like to leave him under such circumstances, and we all three dined together off a beefsteak pie, which was one of the many good things for which Peggotty was famous, and which was curiously flavoured on this occasion, I recollect well, by a miscellaneous taste of tea, coffee, butter, bacon, cheese, new loaves, firewood, candles, and walnut ketchup continually ascending from the shop. After dinner, we sat for an hour or so near the window without talking much. And then Mr. Peggotty got up and brought his oilskin bag and his stout stick and laid them on the table. He accepted from his sister's stock of ready money a small sum on account of his legacy, barely enough, I should have thought, to keep him for a month. He promised to communicate with me when anything befell him, and he slung his bag about him, took his hat and stick, and bade us both goodbye. "All good attend you, dear old woman," he said, embracing Peggotty. "And you too, Marse Davy," shaking hands with me. "I'm a-going to seek her far and wide. If she should come home, while I'm away. But that ain't like to be. Or if I should bring her back, my meaning is that she and me shall live and die where no one can't reproach her. If any hurt should come to me, remember that the last words I left for her was, my unchanged love is with my darling child, and I forgive her. He said this solemnly, bareheaded. Then putting on his hat, he went down the stairs and away. We followed to the door. It was a warm, dusty evening, just the time when in the great main thoroughfare out of which that byway turned, there was a temporary lull in the eternal tread of feet upon the pavement, and a strong, red sunshine. He turned alone at the corner of our shady street into a glow of light in which we lost him. Rarely did that hour of the evening come. Rarely did I wake at night. Rarely did I look up at the moon or stars, or watch the falling rain, or hear the wind. But I thought of his solitary figure toiling on, poor pilgrim, and recalled the words, I'm a-going to seek her, far and wide. If any hurt should come to me, remember that the last words I left for her was, my unchanged love is with my darling child, and I forgive her. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow, same time and place. Actually, I can't read tomorrow. Sorry, I'm not reading tomorrow, but I'll read the day after. The day after 5 Pacific at Fireside Reading on Instagram. That's Saturday, not Friday. All chapters uploaded to the YouTube channel, Fireside Reading. So until I see you again, please stay very well. Good night.